Hey guys, I want to share with you something that at first been made only for our mentorship students. But this information is so valuable that we want to share some of it with all of you. It's an art lectures made by our amazing mentor Phillip Zhang. Phillip is a principal artist at Riot Games and ex-artist at Activision Blizzard who working on titles like League of Legends, Teamfight Tactics, World of Warcraft, and also he's an art professor at Laguna College at California for the last 8 years. So yeah, very professional guy. This lecture series will cover art fundamentals of polymodeling, skyboxes, foliage, and many more things. Art fundamentals is something any artist needs, especially the ones that don't have any art degree like myself. I started learning those only like after 8 years in the industry and it totally changed my art view. And I hope it will help you too. Let's start.
Today, let's talk about our first topic, Design 101, Shape Language. You might wonder, why do we talk about shape language? Why don't we talk about rendering or color? Are those things more important than shapes? Well, the thing is, shape design is probably the most important thing in visual art. And I have learned this the hardest way possible. For many years, when I was in school and when I just started working, I would spend hours and hours trying to render something or trying to come up with a nice composition, and it just doesn't work. And the reason why it didn't work the way I wanted was because my lack of understanding in shape language. So today, let's go over the fundamentals of shape language. Let's begin. It doesn't matter what you do, 2D environment, 3D character, illustration for cards, or 2D characters, VFX, it really doesn't matter. As long as we're doing some kind of visual design, essentially we're designing shapes. We're putting different shapes together in a way that's pleasing to our viewer's eyes. So shape design is the first thing we need to understand as designers or artists. Let's move on. So, fundamentals of shape design. We human beings like to seek order within chaos and seek variety within order. What does that mean? Well, if you look at those two groups of shapes, you'll see that the first group feels kind of boring. You have a bunch of parallel lines, so you can imagine to the left or right, you're just gonna see more and more of those parallel lines. Or in this version, we have a net shape, but it's kind of tieable. So as you can imagine, it can just keep going to the left and right, up and down, and just, stretching for forever. Or in this case, we got big, medium, and small. You're just going to keep going small, going down, or keep getting bigger, going up, right? Or in this case, it's even more boring. We're just going to get cube, 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 all in the same size, which is boring, right? So as long as those shapes are predictable, they become boring. And we do want to make our shapes feel more unpredictable so that we can keep our viewers on their toes. If we look at those shapes, you can see those lines, they have like a sense of directionality, almost like they're moving upward. And that has a sense of movement. They kind of keep us wonder what's going to happen next. And in this case, we have some very interesting arrangement of big, medium, small that also made the shape feel more interesting. Or in this case, we have, instead of big, medium, small, we go big, small, and medium. Well, that's interesting because what's going to be the next? Is this one going to be bigger or smaller? We don't know. And this one's also very interesting, right? It goes from small to regular size to skinny, which is also a very interesting combination of shapes. So let's break it down even more. The first idea to think about is actually this one. We want to always avoid half and half shapes and avoid parallel shapes in visual design at all costs. They are our number one enemy. Okay? So, first of all, we want to avoid parallel lines. When you do live drawing, the teacher will say, hey, do not do two straight lines for the arm or two, curve that's symmetrical, because then you are getting the stick figure or the Michelin man, which is very boring and kind of derpy. But for those ones, you can see we have a very nice balance of curve versus straight versus curve versus straight. And that kind of curve versus straight gives us a rhythm, makes us, feel the design is more interesting. And in figure design, of course, we do this a lot. In this case, we can see that those straight lines are indicating hard structures. We have the rib cage versus the pelvis, right? And the curve shape is kind of giving us a sense of movement, a sense of force. And that kind of balance gives us a very compelling visual design. And of course, we have special cases. If you're doing a building or a bunch of fences, there will be repetitive shapes, and it's just what it is. However, as stylized artists, we can even find more interesting ways to create window designs or fence designs. We'll get to that in a little bit. So let's keep going. The most important idea to think about is straight against curve. We never want to run two similar forces into each other because they will clash and create a half and half situation. Because remember, whenever we have half and half, our viewer will have a hard time to know which part to look at first, and that's a problem. In this case, when you have two lines that are parallel, our eyes are just going to travel right across without stopping. That's not good. Or in those cases, we have symmetrical shapes, and they're almost like two forces going against each other, and that create half and half visual design because our viewers will have a hard time to know if they should be looking at the left or the right. If we offset the design like this, or even better, curve versus straight, we're gonna get a much more interesting design. And that is why we should always start with a D-shape practice. Try to find some visual reference and draw those reference using the D shape, because the letter D is naturally a straight line and a curved line. And the thing is, you can draw pretty much everything using those two shapes. D only. And that will give you some interesting design. And of course, you cannot really post those into your Artstation portfolio, but they are a really good warm-up exercise. And we're going to introduce more of those exercises today. So here we have a design by Tooth that's pretty much D-shape only. If we take a closer look, we can see that it is basically a D shape, another D, and another D shape, right? It's so simple, but so effective. It has so much energy. For those of you who want to understand how to do stylized characters or creatures, this is the direction you should be looking at, So on the straight versus curve topic, let's look at some more examples. Here, I want to introduce a school of thinking called the Force. It is introduced by Mike Martisi. There are a lot of videos on YouTube posted by him about how to draw figures with a sense of movement, with force. I'm not gonna steal his wind here. Go check it out. It's really good. I have personally learned a lot from those videos, and it is all about straight against curve, but he kind of went into like way more depth and really break it down into like how you should be doing different part of the body to kind of create that energy, that gesture, something that you should be really looking into, even if you're not doing character art. Because very quickly, you'll see that all those principles can be easily translated into, say, like environment design or prop design or even UI design, VFX design. They're all sharing the same principles. Let's keep going. Here we have some examples from Mike Mignola. The reason why I put those here is because from afar, they look like very polished illustrations, right? Very detailed. But if you take a closer look, you'll see that there's actually zero detail. There's nothing. Look at it. It's pretty much flat colors. And the reason why it feels so detailed, the reason why the composition feels so interesting is because the artist spent a lot of time arranging those shapes and they're working together in a very interesting way. And as you can see here, there's zero detail, but you get all the information and the composition itself feels very strong. That kind of brings us, to another topic, which I will be echoing a lot in this lecture series. That is, details do not matter. There's a reason why we're going to talk about rendering in our last lecture. I think that is because rendering is being overlooked by most of us. Like, we think that in order for a painting to feel finished, we have to put in a ton of details. That is completely not true, because look at those. There's zero details. It's pretty much, just a bunch of flat colors and some lines, but they look so cool, right? And that's the thing. You don't have to spend time, spend hours and hours rendering the armor set or, the hair. Those stuff, yes, if you do it right, you can add on top of what you already have, but the base of your image is going to be the combination of your shapes. If those shapes work well, you don't really have to render much to make it work. And if those shapes do not work well, it's just going to be kind of like what my teacher used to say, putting lipstick on a pig. It doesn't matter how much you render, the image is not going to work. So shape design, the most important thing. Okay, let's keep going. Here we have some other examples of just very interesting shapes. As you can see, the artists kind of look at the reference, but they didn't really follow exactly what the reference is. It's being pushed a lot. And if you go through the videos by Mike, the force videos, you'll see a lot of those, like how to like exaggerate the gestures, the movement to enhance that rhythm to make your shapes more interesting. And again, it might seem that, those are all just gestures for human figures, and you are maybe, a prop artist or environment concept artist, I don't know. And you wonder, why should I be even looking at this? Well, like I said, it's all connected. Can you imagine next time when you draw a tree or a prop, push those shapes in a way that they're exaggerated as if they're performing in a show? And that's what stylized art is about, right? We do not want to just copy what we see in the reference, and we want to kind of improvise based on what we see and come up with something that's more unique, more expressive, more interesting. Of course, we have special cases. There will be a lot of design that have symmetrical shapes. Just, we talk about like we want to do like straight against curve. But for buildings, for a lot of clothing and for animals, they will be using symmetrical shapes. It is just what it is, but um, there are ways we can kind of take advantage of this and come up with interesting designs. And we'll get to that in a bit. Let's keep going. Let's look at some secret code or I call it meta. Whenever I play TFT, I'm gonna type in TFT meta and look up for like all those comps that are working. For artists, there are also metas when it comes to shape design. Let's take a look at some of the Joe Matt's drawing as an example. Um, Joe Matt is a legendary comic artist who later on became a legendary designer in the game industry, and we can certainly learn a lot from this guy. So, the first group of shapes I want to introduce is hourglass and drumsticks. And if you look at it, it's literally just hourglass and drumsticks, right? Like chicken legs. But what does it mean? Well, it means to make an interesting design, we want to use medium, small, and big, or big, small, and medium. To make it easier, we can memorize it as 2, 1, and 3. If you look at this arm, isn't it 2, 1, and 3? Or this arm, it's also 2, 1, and 3. You see? This is 3, 1, 2, 2, 1, 3. It's the same thing. Joe Matt is using the exact same code for all the arms. Something to think about. And of course, this is just a simplified way of memorizing it, and you can certainly use it for other things beyond the arms. Here we have a second group, dagger and vases. So if you look at it, it's pretty much 2, 3, 1, right? 2, 2, 3, 1, and this one is 2, 1, 3, 3, 1, 2. Something to remember. So to create a robust figure, you can do 2, 3, and 1, or in this case, you can do 2, 3, and 1 for a very strong arm, right? And imagine if a game art student, who's trying to design like a super strong arm, they'll probably try something like this. They'll be like, okay, I'm gonna do a crazy strong deltoid and a huge bicep and even bigger forearm and huge hands as well. And the problem with this design is you're pretty much doing, like a 1, 2, and 3, right? It's boring. Remember, we have predictable shapes and the design becomes boring. And in this case, it is 2, 3, and 1, much more exciting. Okay? And the third group of shapes, I call it the wing straight. And this is mostly for hair and fur. So here we have 2, 3, 1, or 3, 1, and 2. What does it mean? Well, next time when you have to do a bunch of hair or fur, just remember it, because you can simply just go 2, 3, 1, 1, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1. As you can see, it's just the same thing repeating over and over for the entire design. Right? It's a meta. Learn it and use it. Okay? So let's get to the second part. The 3 most common design techniques would be balance, rhythm, and contrast. So let's look at balance. Balance is pretty much, what you assume it is. If you have, 2 weights on, 2 sides of the scale that are equal, you get a symmetrical balance, right? And you have, weights that are different on the scale, but as long as you offset a pivot, you can still achieve counterbalance. Or you can have 2 smaller weights on one side and a bigger one on the other side that can also balance the scale, right? But obviously, we're not doing physical weight here. We're talking about visual weight, which works very similarly. So the first type of balance would be absolute balance. In this case, we have a perfect symmetrical design that's usually for, temples, animals, buildings. When we do stuff like this, it's much easier for us to kind of just make sure everything is symmetrical so that we have this very formal feeling that, you should be looking in the middle and nowhere else. And if you want to turn a potion bottle into a human-like creature, maybe try to create symmetrical design so that it starts to feel more relatable, more like a humanoid creature, right? That's some ways we can use absolute balance. But I think 90% of the time in visual design, or I should say 99% of the time, we are doing counterbalance. And what counterbalance is basically offsetting the center so that we have more visual weight on one side and less on the other side. If we look at this dress as an example, what if, let me change my color to black, and what if we get rid of this part? What if we get rid of the white part on the top left? This dress will feel very unbalanced, right? You'll see that it's way too heavy on the bottom right, and there's nothing to look at on the top left. And that is why having this piece right here just counterbalances the whole design. Very similarly, if we look at this one, what if, the game design team came in and say, hey, actually, we cannot use this sword design. Let's try something else. Can we use a dagger instead of that sword? Well, we can, but it messed up the whole design. Why? Because here we have all those heavy visual elements on the right, and this thing is not enough to counterbalance the visual weight. And as a result, the character will feel like, she's falling to the right or her left. Or in this case, again, imagine if we crop this image to here only. It will feel very heavy on the right because, all the details, all the contrast, and there's just not enough stuff to counterbalance it. Which is why this part is very important. It's counterbalancing the whole design and making it feel more cohesive, right? Here, let's move on to the second part, rhythm. So, what is rhythm? We kind of talk about this part. Whenever we have predictable things, it's boring. And we as humans like unpredictable stuff. So when you hear something like, it feels very boring. If it's a little better. And if it's multiple tracks, something like da, 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 where you have multiple soundtracks all playing together, it become more interesting. And that's how we compose music. And that is also how we should be looking at rhythm in visual design. So if we just have one repeating thing, it's not a rhythm. When we have multiple tracks, that's when rhythm is being generated. If we look at this, VFX is actually a very interesting example because I don't know if you have taken like a VFX class before, but to make something like this, you need multiple animation, right? You have the fire animation that go from like a large ball to kind of like a pillar shape to just fade out. And then you have those, circular energy over here. It's kind of like an S shape. Over here, it kind of stretches out. And over here, it just spreads everywhere. You have this ember shape. Over here, it's kind of, staying pretty close to the fire. And over here, it starts to spread. Over here is everywhere. And you have the bloom. Over here is very strong, that glow. Here it gets weaker, and here it gets really, really weak. And all of those things, when they play together in a certain way, they create rhythm. Same thing for this one. And that is how we generate energy, a sense of movement in visual design. And of course, we kind of talk about this briefly over here. In order for something to have rhythm, we want to give them a sense of movement. Like those shapes, they do not have a sense of movement here. But by kind of forcing them to a direction, if you think about Control T in Photoshop, you kind of have that tool to deform your shapes, or FFD in 3ds Max, or Lattice tool in Maya. Basically, you group the shapes to give them a sense of movement, a sense that they're moving towards a certain direction, and by composing them together, you get a sense of movement and rhythm. Let's look at this example. Here, I kind of give you a more, straightforward way of visualizing how rhythm or sense of movement works. Over here, we have a bunch of toys sitting on a pillowcase, each minding their own business. There is no rhythm or sense of movement whatsoever. But if you pull the pillowcase, you can see that the force that you created are forcing all those shapes to move towards a direction, and now they start to have a sense of rhythm. If we look at this Akali image right here, you can see that there are multiple soundtracks, quotation mark. You can see the pink smoke is doing a circular shape. Actually, let's mark this. You can see that, the smokes, they're all doing something like this, right? And then we have the hair that's kind of doing this circular shape. And we have those searchlights that's doing this. And of course, we have those electric energy that are kind of following the shape of the bike. And even her gesture, if you look at the gesture of Katie Akali, like she is doing something like this. And all of those things, they're not exactly moving towards the same direction, but kind of like a similar direction. And when they all play together, you start to see a very strong sense of rhythm in this image. And that's how it works. Here you can see some pen overs I did for students. And in the before version, some of the shapes are just kind of doing their own thing. They're not flowing with the rest of the image. And in my pen over, I kind of forced the bat wings, the hat, to kind of create, a sense of movement. And when they're working together, they start to have a better gesture, a better rhythm. Same thing for this character. Before, it's kind of boring, the arm, this leaf thing, they're all just kind of chilling there, doing their own thing. But I changed their shapes to make sure that they're flowing into each other and working with each other in a way that's generating rhythm. Okay? Something to think about when you design your next project.